The night was thick with the scent of magnolias and the hum of cicadas. A car pulled up to the small, two-story house on 706 Union Avenue, the headlights slicing through the darkness. Out stepped a young man, barely 20, with a guitar slung over his shoulder. His hair, a mass of dark curls, was slicked back with a bit of pomade. He wore a tight, black leather jacket that hugged his lean frame, and his jeans were so tight they might as well have been painted on. He was Elvis Presley, and this was Memphis, 1954. Elvis had just finished a gig at a local club, a place where the air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the crowd was wild with excitement. He had seen the way people looked at him, the way girls screamed and boys tried to mimic his every move. But tonight, something was different. As he walked up the steps to his small, modest home, he felt a strange mix of exhilaration and unease. He was on the cusp of something big, something that could change everything. The house was quiet when he entered. His mother, Gladys, was already in bed, and his father, Vernon, was out working a late shift at the Cotton Gin. The only sound was the soft ticking of the old clock in the living room. Elvis walked to the kitchen, where a plate of cold fried chicken and a glass of sweet tea waited for him. He sat down at the table, picked up a piece of chicken, and took a bite. The familiar taste of his mother's cooking brought a momentary sense of comfort, but it was quickly overshadowed by the thoughts swirling in his head. He thought about the day he had walked into Sam Phillips' son's studio, a small, dimly lit room on Union Avenue. He had gone there to record a song for his mother's birthday, but something else had happened, something magic. Sam had heard something in Elvis' voice, something that set him apart from all the other singers who had come and gone. He had heard a raw, unbridled talent that could not be contained. And so, they had started working together, recording songs that blended country, blues, and rock and roll in a way that no one had ever heard before. Elvis knew that the world was changing, and he was at the center of it. He had seen the way people reacted to him, the way they hung on his every word and gesture. He had seen the way they danced, the way they laughed, the way they cried. He knew that he had something special, something that could bring people together in a way that nothing else could. But with that power came a price. He had already started to feel the weight of expectations, the pressure to be more than just a singer, to be a star. He had seen the way the older generation looked at him, the way they shook their heads and muttered about the end of the world. He had heard the preachers on the radio, the ones who called him the devil's music, the ones who said he was corrupting the youth. Elvis knew that he was different. He had always been different. In high school, he had been the kid who wore lace shirts and pegged pants, the kid who refused to cut his hair to play football. He had been the kid who spent hours listening to the blues on the radio, the kid who could sing like no one else. But now, he was more than just a kid. He was a man on the verge of becoming a legend. He finished his chicken and stood up, leaving the plate on the table. He walked to his room, where a small, battered guitar case lay on the bed. He opened it and took out his guitar, the one he had bought with his first paycheck. He sat down on the edge of the bed and began to play, the notes floating out into the night. Outside, the city of Memphis seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next note, the next song, the next moment that would change everything. And inside, Elvis Presley played, his voice a mix of longing and hope, of dreams and fears. He was just a kid from Memphis, but he was about to become the king. Elvis slammed the door of his truck and rushed into the house. His mama, Gladys, jumped at the noise. "What's wrong, Elvis?" she asked, her eyes full of worry. "Nothing, Mama," he replied, setting his radio on the kitchen table. He turned the dial to Dewey Phillips' show and told her not to touch it, no matter what. "Make sure you and Daddy listen to Dewey tonight, and don't tell nobody. I'll be back," he said, giving her a quick hug. "Elvis, what's going on?" she asked, but he was already out the door, the evening air and the promise of something big the only things on his mind. Elvis headed to the Suzor No. 2 movie theater on North Main, where he used to work as an usher. He walked in during a double feature, barely paying attention to the Roy Rogers movie playing on the screen. He slouched in his seat, legs sprawled over the seat in front of him, and chewed on red licorice. His mind was elsewhere, filled with the music that always seemed to be playing in Memphis gospel, rhythm and blues jazz. It was the soundtrack of his life, the rhythm that kept him moving. Elvis's dreams were tied to Beale Street, the heart of Memphis. For him, like for so many others, Beale was where it all began. Sam Phillips, the man who would later discover Elvis, first visited Memphis as a young boy. He and his friends drove up and down Beale Street at 4 in the morning, amazed by the sights and sounds. There were people from all walks of life, dressed to the nines, winos, and folks from the countryside, all looking for something more. Beale was the center of the black universe, a place where the sacred and the profane coexisted. Elvis lived with his parents, Gladys and Vernon, in the Lauderdale Courts, a public housing complex. It was a step up for them, but life was still hard. Elvis went to Hume's High School, where he didn't fit in. He wasn't a great student and never thought about college. He worked after-school jobs to help his family, handing over his earnings to his dad every Friday. He wanted to stand out to be noticed, and he did this through his style. He grew sideburns and slicked back his hair, inspired by the truck drivers he saw on Highway 78. He wanted to look older, to be different. Elvis was shy, but he had a bold sense of style. He loved pink and black, colors that made a statement. He cared deeply about his appearance, spending hours on his hair and choosing his clothes carefully. He wanted to look as sharp as the musicians he admired, and there was only one place to go for that: Lansky's on Beale Street. Bernard Lansky, the owner of Lansky's, was a shrewd businessman with a knack for fashion. He and his brother, Guy, started the store selling surplus goods after the war. As styles changed, they transitioned into high fashion, catering to both black and white customers. Lansky's became the place to go for the latest trends, especially for musicians. Rufus Thomas, B.B. King, and even James Blackwell, the gospel singer, shopped there. Bernard knew how to talk to people and make them feel special. He treated every customer like a friend, and his store was always bustling. Elvis had been eyeing the windows of Lansky's for a while, admiring the clothes on display. Bernard noticed him one afternoon, a tall, skinny kid with wild hair and a look of longing. He invited Elvis into the store, sensing the potential in this shy but determined young man. Elvis was hesitant at first, but Bernard's warm welcome made him feel at home. From that day on, Lansky's became a second home to Elvis, and Bernard became a mentor and friend. Elvis's life was about to change. He had a dream, and with the help of Bernard and the energy of Beale Street, he was ready to make it a reality. Bernard Lansky, the store owner, couldn't help but smile as he watched Elvis Presley explore the racks of clothing. Elvis was wide-eyed, like a kid in a candy store, touching and admiring every piece. He ran his hands over the patterned jackets with velvet collars, the sleek tuxedos, and the unique black pegged pants without back pockets. Bernard had never seen anyone so excited about clothes. But when Elvis mentioned he didn't have any money, Bernard just waved it off. There was something about Elvis that Bernard liked. He was so friendly and eager to make a good impression. Elvis promised Bernard that when he got rich, he would buy the whole store. Bernard laughed and told him, "Just buy for me, I don't want you buying me out." They both laughed, and Elvis felt a bit more at ease. That Friday, Elvis came back and put a shirt on layaway, which cost about $3.95. It was a lot of money for him, but Bernard praised him like he was starting a fancy wardrobe. Elvis smiled, feeling a bit more confident. He was on his way, even if it was just a small step. Sam Phillips, on the other hand, was a different kind of man. He was confident, almost cocky, but he had a dream. He believed he could spot greatness in people, especially in their music. Sam had worked in radio since he was young, moving from station to station, learning everything he could. He wasn't much of a book learner, but he had a curious mind and endless energy. For Sam, the real lessons came from the people and the world around him. When Sam arrived in Memphis, he joined Rec Radio Station. He did everything from announcing to producing, and even fixed the equipment. But he was always looking for something more, something authentic. The polished music from Nashville and New York didn't interest him. He was drawn to the raw, powerful music of the blues players on Beale Street. He felt a deep connection to their rhythms, the sounds of the working class, and the struggles they faced. Sam's vision was clear, but not everyone at Rec shared it. Marion Kasker, a fellow radio veteran, was one of the few who understood him. She had fallen in love with him and together they worked long hours, often 16 or more a day. Despite the stress, Sam felt alive and driven. He knew he had to follow his dream, even if it meant taking risks. In 1950, Sam and Marion opened their own studio, Sun Records, on Union Avenue. They did everything themselves, from laying the tiles to setting up the recording equipment. Sun Records was their baby, and they poured their hearts into it. Sam recorded anything and everything, from funerals to weddings, but his true passion was the raw, emotional music of the blues. He recorded B.B. King and Jackie Brunston, and Rocket 88 became a huge hit. Sam's dream was starting to take shape. In the late summer of 1953, a nervous Elvis Presley walked into Sun Records. He was tall and lanky, with greasy hair and bad skin, but his eyes were full of hope. He told Marion Kasker that he wanted to make a record for his mother's birthday, though it was clear he had other reasons. Marion listened as Elvis sang My Happiness, and That's When Your Heartaches Begin. His voice was tentative at first, but there was a raw emotion in his performance that caught her attention. Sam, behind the glass, thought Elvis was an interesting singer, and told him they might call him someday. Elvis paid his $3.95 and left, feeling a mix of hope and disappointment. For months, he stopped by the studio, hoping to hear from Sam, but nothing happened. Marion tried to encourage him, but Elvis was at a crossroads. He didn't know if his dream would ever come true. He continued to visit, but as time went on, he came less often. Sun Records and Sam Phillips seemed out of reach. Marion, who had grown fond of Elvis, believed in him. She knew he was special, and she was sure that one day, his talent would shine through. Elvis, on the other hand, was still just a young man with a dream, waiting for the chance to prove himself. Elvis's life wasn't all gloomy. He was just 19, a high school graduate with a steady job, and he had recorded 4 songs, even if he had to pay for them. He also had some cool shirts from Lansky's, but what he really wanted was a girlfriend. One day, Elvis started going to the Assembly of God Church in South Memphis. That's where he met Dixie Locke, a 15-year-old sophomore at Southside High. Dixie noticed Elvis right away. He stood out with his pink and black outfit, greased hair, and fidgety manner. He seemed different from the other boys, who all looked like their dads. Dixie thought Elvis was shy, but he also did things to get attention, like dressing in wild clothes. She could tell he was trying to prove something to himself. When they first met, Dixie realized how different he was. She knew right away that he wasn't like other people. For their first date, Dixie and Elvis went to the Rainbow Roller Dome. Dixie didn't actually get a direct invite from Elvis. She just talked loudly about going there with her friends, hoping he would overhear. He did. When she arrived, Elvis was already there, trying to look cool but struggling to skate. Dixie took pity on him and introduced herself. They ended up talking a lot, and even stayed for the second session. Afterward, they went to Kay's on Crump Boulevard for burgers and milkshakes. Dixie made a fake phone call to her parents, saying she'd be home late. It was past midnight when she got home, but she didn't care. She was in love. Elvis called her the next day, and they went to the movies. They saw each other again on Wednesday. Finally, it was time for Elvis to meet Dixie's parents, especially her father. Mr. Locke was tall and quiet, and everyone in the family did what he said. Dixie had tried to prepare her family for Elvis, but even she was surprised by how different he looked in their living room. Her mother and sister were not impressed. Her uncle even offered Elvis $2 to get a haircut. The Lockes found Elvis funny, but none of it mattered to Dixie. She was in love, and Elvis had given her his ring. That spring, guitarist Scotty Moore was looking for ways to boost his music career. He stopped by Sun Records, where Sam Phillips told him about a young ballad singer named Elvis Presley. Scotty agreed to meet Elvis, and on July 4th, Elvis showed up at Scotty's house in his signature outfits. They jammed together, and while Elvis was nervous, Scotty and Bill Black, the bass player, were impressed by his voice. The next night, they all went to Sun Records to record. They struggled to find a song Elvis knew all the way through, but then he started playing That's All Right, an old blues song. Sam Phillips was blown away by Elvis's voice and energy. It felt fresh and different. Sam knew he had something special. Sam called Dewey Phillips, a popular DJ in Memphis, to play the song. Dewey loved it and played it repeatedly on his show. The phones at the station were flooded with calls. Sam told Elvis about the success, and Elvis's parents rushed to the theater to find him. They brought him to the station, and Elvis was amazed by the attention. A year later, in Germany, a young Bill Wyman heard "That's All Right" and was inspired. He drew Elvis on his leather coat, and everyone in his camp started calling him Elvis. With a hit under his belt, Sam started booking Elvis, Scotty, and Bill for shows around the area. They played at the Bon Air Club, and by mid-October, Scotty and Elvis quit their jobs to focus on the band. Elvis's father, Vernon, was skeptical but supportive. Just before going on tour, Elvis received a $500 royalty check, but without a checking account, he had to go to a National Bank of Lansky to cash it. Elvis handed the check over to Bernard, who corrected him again, smiling. "Mr. Lansky is my father, I'm Bernard," he said. Bernard tucked the check into his shirt pocket, and Elvis felt a wave of relief. $500 was a lot of money, and he was eager to buy some new clothes. With the check in hand, Elvis and the boys Scotty, Bill, and later DJ Fontana hit the road. It was 1954, and they played anywhere that would have them. High school auditoriums, community centers, and small venues in Texas, where they even strung chicken wire in front of the bandstand. Elvis loved being on the road. He was shy and inarticulate in everyday conversations, but when he stepped on stage, he came alive. He sang with a passion that touched people's souls. Scotty noticed how Elvis moved on stage. Most singers stood flat-footed, but Elvis stood on the balls of his feet, and his legs would naturally start to shake as he played. It wasn't a gimmick, it was just who he was. The audience loved it, and they responded with wild enthusiasm. Elvis started to play with their reactions, moving more and more freely. He felt a connection with the crowd that was almost electric. In March 1955, the band played a string of shows across Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi. They played in small towns and big cities, and the crowds were always wild. On March 23rd, Elvis took his first airplane ride to New York City to audition for the Arthur Godfrey Show. The talent scouts showed no interest, but that didn't stop them. They played shows in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Texas, and the crowds only grew bigger and more excited. On May 5th, after months on the road, Elvis was chased by a pack of screaming girls across a football field. He was nervous and sensitive, but on stage, he was a different person. He wore a wild patterned jacket from Lansky, loose black pants, and two-tone shoes. His shyness and bravado were always side by side, and his presence was magnetic. He could feel the energy in the room, and used it to create something special. Elvis and the band played with a new member, DJ Fontana, who had experience playing in strip joints. This background helped him accentuate Elvis movements with his drumming. DJ would watch Elvis and play an accent wherever he moved, making the performance even more dynamic. The audience responded with even more fervor, and the shows became a wild, spontaneous experience. By the spring of 1956, Elvis was a sensation. The crowds were so loud that the band could barely hear the music. They had to watch Elvis movements to know what to play next. Scotty said, "We were the only band in history directed by an ass. It was like being in a sea of sound." Elvis picked up influences from all over. He loved gospel music, which he had grown up with in Tupelo, Mississippi. He also admired Little Richard, who was known for his wild performances and flamboyant style. Little Richard's influence made Elvis look tame in comparison, but it also gave him the confidence to be himself on stage. On May 13, 1955, at a baseball park in Jacksonville, Florida, Elvis told the crowd, "Girls, I'll see you backstage." The fans went wild, and a riot broke out as they tried to get to him. This was when Colonel Tom Parker, who had been interested in managing Elvis, saw his potential. He convinced Elvis to sign a contract, and with the approval of his parents, Elvis began his lifelong partnership with the Colonel. In just over a year, Elvis had gone from being unknown to being on the verge of stardom. Marion Kasker, who had first recorded Elvis at Sun Records, saw something special in him. "He was like a mirror in a way," she said. "Whatever you were looking for, you were going to find in him." In November 1955, Colonel Tom Parker sold Elvis' Sun contract to RCA for $35,000. Sam Phillips, who had discovered Elvis, was asked if he regretted selling him. "Absolutely not," Sam said. "It was the greatest blessing that ever happened to me. I was able to create other things and try new ideas." Elvis had a dream to sing in front of people, and he was making it come true. Sam Phillips had a dream to find a new sound, and he did. Colonel Tom Parker had a dream to make a lot of money, and he did that too. In the end, everyone got what they wanted, and rock and roll was born. Elvis and his twin brother, Jessie, were born on January 8, 1935, but Jessie didn't survive. He was buried in a simple cardboard box in an unmarked grave. This loss deeply affected Elvis, his mother Gladys, and his father Vernon. Gladys, who couldn't have more children, poured all her love into Elvis, often thinking about Jessie. Elvis, a sensitive child, felt guilty, believing that somehow he was responsible for his brother's death. The Presleys were very poor. They lived as sharecroppers and farmers, working hard just to get by. Vernon and Gladys did whatever jobs they could find, from farming to sewing. Despite their struggles, they made sure Elvis had good manners and taught him to treat everyone with respect. They believed that being poor was no excuse for being rude. Elvis grew up in a world where faith and hard work were the most important things. He and his mother attended church almost every day, and during the spring, they went to camp revival meetings. These experiences shaped Elvis's deep connection to gospel music, which brought him peace and comfort throughout his life. Vernon, trying to make ends meet, made a big mistake in 1938. He and two friends altered and cashed a check from their landlord, Orville Beale. This led to Vernon being sent to Parchman Farm State Penitentiary for 3 years. For Elvis and Gladys, this was a devastating blow. They were evicted from their home and had to move in with relatives. Gladys became more anxious, and Elvis often cried, missing his father. They would take long bus rides to visit Vernon, who was away from home. When Vernon was released after 8 months, the family decided to move to Memphis for better opportunities. They sold their belongings and drove off in their old car, hoping for a better life. In Memphis, they found a home at Lauderdale Courts, a public housing project. This was a big improvement for the Presleys. They finally had a real home with indoor plumbing and a place to call their own. At Humes High School, Elvis stood out. He was shy and eccentric, with long hair that made him a target for bullies. The other kids called him Miss Elvis and Squirrel because of his unique style, but Elvis didn't let it bother him. He was determined to be himself, no matter what others thought. He found escape in music, especially gospel and blues, and in comic books. Captain Marvel Jr. became one of his favorite characters, inspiring him with the idea of being a hero in his own way. Despite the hardships, Elvis had a strong bond with his mother. Gladys was his biggest supporter, and he did everything he could to make her happy. He would rush home early to be with her, and they often talked about their hopes and dreams. For Elvis, his mother's love and his faith in God were the two most important things in his life. As Elvis grew older, he began to imagine a different world for himself. He saw himself as the hero of his own story, just like in the comic books he read. He knew he was different, and he embraced it. He walked with confidence, like a gunslinger in a Western movie, ready to face whatever came his way. His dreams were big, and he was determined to make them come true. Dixie had never seen a grown-up quite like Elvis' father, Vernon. And like her own dad, who was the boss at home, Vernon seemed unusually quiet. He didn't act as confidently as the other men she knew, like her uncles or her friends' dads. Dixie didn't remember ever seeing him work. He said he had a bad back. Every Friday, without fail, Elvis would hand over his $40 paycheck from Crown Electric, as if he were the one supporting the family. No one in the Presley family found this strange, but Dixie did. Elvis explained that his parents were getting older, and it was his responsibility to take care of them. At the time, Vernon was only 38 years old. "I never saw him be unkind. I never saw him drink or act unruly. I'm sure he was a very loving husband and devoted to the family, but he seemed like an outsider. He wasn't really part of Elvis and Mrs. Presley's world," Dixie said. She knew it sounded strange, but they had such a strong love and respect for each other, and I don't think there was a lot of respect for him during that time. Elvis would be upset if he ever heard her talk like this, but it was almost as if Elvis was the father and his dad was just the little boy. Despite the challenges, Elvis always believed things would get better. He always knew he was going to do something, Vernon said, as if he and Gladys had never doubted their son's potential. When we didn't have a dime, he used to sit on the doorstep and say, "One of these days it'll be different." For his 11th birthday, Elvis had wanted a bicycle, but got a 6-string guitar instead. As a teenager in Memphis, Elvis defined himself as someone who sang. He carried his guitar everywhere, careful to keep it dry in the rain. Although he was very shy, singing was the first thing that allowed Elvis to step outside of himself. "I wasn't popular in high school," he admitted. "I wasn't dating anyone there. I failed music, only thing I ever failed. And then they entered me in this talent show, and I came out and did my first number, Till I Waltz Again With You, by Teresa Brewer. And when I came on stage, I heard people whispering, 'cause nobody knew I even sang. It was amazing how popular I became after that." Elvis loved the feeling he got when he sang. It was like everything in his life became perfect. His mom's worries and his dad's helplessness faded away. He no longer felt lost or unsure. When he sang, he felt powerful and loved. He wanted to carry that feeling with him everywhere. He wanted to live in that feeling all the time. At night, Elvis would sit on the steps outside their apartment. He loved the dark. In the shadows, his face seemed almost handsome. In the dark, he felt brave enough to be more completely himself. He sang love songs mostly. He sang Eddie Arnold's Molly Darling, Ring and Gary Crosby's Moonlight Bay. A crowd would gather, neighbors who might have ignored him during the day. They waited quietly, wanting him to continue. In the dark, no one laughed at his acne or his awkward teenage looks. His features took on a delicate beauty. Most of the crowd were women. Elvis preferred them. They reminded him of his mom, Gladys. He felt more comfortable with women, more himself. He didn't have to pretend or compete like he did with boys. They didn't make fun of his hair or clothes. They accepted him as he was. His Aunt Lillian noticed this too. Elvis got out there at night with the girls, and he just sang his heart out. He was different with the girls. I'm embarrassed to say, but he'd rather have a whole bunch of girls around him than the boys he didn't give a thing about the boys. For his whole life, starting with his mom, women seemed to sense something vulnerable in Elvis, something that made them want to comfort him. By the time he graduated from high school, the essential Elvis was in place. His parents loved him, but his twin brother, Jessie, was dead. Despite this, they would always be together in his heart. That was all that mattered to him. There was nothing holding him back. He was bound by no one and nothing, except his dreams. Walking down the street, he had his own soundtrack in his head. Ever since he was old enough to understand, he was the star of his own movie. Living outside the norms of society, Elvis had the freedom to create his own world, his own vision. This was worth more to him than any college education or desk job. Elvis had a remarkable ability to understand what was happening around him. He could feel the change in the air, the new sounds coming up from the streets. He couldn't explain it, but he knew it was there. He felt it and became part of it. This possibility, this new order, became his style. Jerry Schilling, who would later become a member of the Memphis Mafia, met Elvis in July 1954, when he was 12 years old. It was 2 days after Dewey Phillips played That's All Right on the radio. They both grew up in North Memphis, which was the poor part of town. There was a little park nearby, and Jerry had walked by to see some older guys trying to start a football game. One of them, Red West, knew Jerry's older brother and invited him to join. Jerry was just hanging out, not doing much. His mom had died when he was a year old, and he was raised by his grandmother and aunts and uncles. Music was the stable thing in his life. He had been listening to Red, Hot, and Blue on the radio for almost 2 years, and went to Beale Street to buy records because that was the only place to get black music. 2 nights before, Dewey had played That's All Right for the first time, and that's all the kids could talk about. "This is a boy from Humes High," Dewey said. Jerry's older cousins and brother went to Humes, so he knew about the school. Dewey played the record, and it sounded wild. Jerry thought, "God, a boy from Humes." They went to the huddle to start the game, and Jerry looked over at Elvis and realized, "Oh my God, that's the guy on the radio." Jerry remembered. He had this coolness about him. It's not that he was dressed differently for a Sunday afternoon. He had on jeans and a white t-shirt. His hair was longer, like something out of Blackboard Jungle. What I noticed was that he was so different, you wouldn't just go up and slap him on the back. You had to let him come to you on his terms. He was so cool, almost unapproachable, and then he'd give you this warm smile. He was like a lovable rebel. That day Jerry played with the older guys and started hanging out with them. That's how their friendship began. In later years, when they were famous, Jerry would smile, remembering how unpopular and alone Elvis was in the beginning. He couldn't get 6 people to play football. I'm not talking 6 on a side, just 6 people. In those days, Jerry was extremely shy. He was the youngest in the group, and didn't want to impose. He was a very good football player, and Elvis started looking out for him. With Elvis' success, going to the park on Sunday afternoon became the cool thing to do. The whole town practically showed up. They had real teams with 7 or 10 guys on each side. So many girls and kids came to watch. It became a real social event. The sidelines got so crowded it almost embarrassed Jerry. He wouldn't run out to get a t-shirt to make sure he got in the game like some of the pushier guys. But Elvis always put aside a t-shirt for him. Jerry thought his friend must have remembered that he thought Elvis was cool before everyone else did. No matter who else showed up, Jerry Schilling always got to play. What kind of athlete was Elvis? According to Jerry, Elvis' playing ability was another expression of his style. Elvis could throw the ball very well. I wouldn't call Elvis a natural football player, but what he lacked in natural ability, he made up for with determination. Eventually, it worked out that it was Elvis and his guys against whoever showed up to play on the other side. One time, a couple of ex-professional football players, real bruisers, arrived and thought they could take down the pretty boy singer. They knocked him down pretty hard. Red went back to the huddle, cursing, and said, "I'll take them this time, Elvis." But Elvis said, "No, man, it's okay." They knocked him down again, and Red and some of the guys got really upset. Elvis said, "Leave it alone, it's all right." By the 3rd time, they had so much respect for him for taking it like a man. By the end of the game, they said, "Elvis, can we bring our wives over to introduce them to you?" If he was your friend, Elvis had a real kindness to him, and a great sense of humor. People would ask him, "Elvis, how did you start?" As a child, he would say with that smile. In all the years Jerry worked in show business, Elvis was the only person he knew with that kind of charismatic style. And he had it before he had hit records and movies, when he was trying to scrounge up a touch football game on Sunday afternoon in Memphis, Tennessee. Jerry recalled, "Over the time I spent with Elvis, I would hear people, I don't care for him. I never met anyone who felt that way after they met him. I think sometimes when you meet people that you admire, your opinion of them drops. I think with Elvis it was the opposite." At 19 years old, Elvis was a star. He couldn't get 5 guys together to play football. Nobody knew who he was, but he was a star just by himself. Elvis' twin, Jessie was stillborn. The only sibling of one of the most recognized men in the world, was buried in a pauper's grave in Priceville Cemetery, Mississippi, without a headstone. With his dramatic sense, Elvis decided he and Jessie had to have been identical alike in every way. Although in 1935, in that very simple 2-room house, this could never be confirmed. Elvis loved the idea of being a twin. It was his secret against the world. He daydreamed about Jessie, a boy, and later a man with his walk and the sound of his voice. Someone he had known forever. Someone who understood him even better than he understood himself. For us trying to imagine a twin of Elvis, a man so unique, so talented, it's hard to picture. It's almost impossible to imagine another one of him. His friend Liberace also had a twin who died at birth. Perhaps they discussed this when they met in Vegas. Imagine 2 Liberaces, all that glitter, all those candelabras. Was Elvis obsessed with Jessie, as the tabloids claimed? When he was out in California making movies, one of the tabloids made up a story that he had long conversations with Jessie, and this hurt him deeply. His boyhood friend Jerry Schilling said that Elvis never spoke of his brother. Ever. "I think all that stuff's bullshit." His wife Priscilla agrees. Elvis hardly ever spoke about Jessie. In 1964, Larry Geller, a friend with twin sisters, had long conversations with Elvis about his deceased brother. Perhaps the truth, like most truths, lies somewhere in between. One of Elvis' great gifts was always being able to read his audience. Elvis never forgot his twin brother, Jessie. Even though Jessie never got to live, he was always a part of Elvis' heart. Jessie was more than just a memory. He was a feeling, a presence that Elvis carried with him everywhere. Jessie was the love he never got to know, the brother he never got to see grow up. This loss, this deep, unspoken sorrow, stayed with Elvis all his life. It made him search for love, for connection in every corner of his world. With each song, each performance, Elvis was trying to fill the void left by Jessie's absence. Elvis believed that when one twin died, the other carried their strength. He felt Jessie's energy, his love, even though he had never met him. This belief gave Elvis a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going, to keep reaching for the stars. But it also came with a weight, a responsibility that no one should have to bear. Despite this, Elvis found a way to shine, to make the most of the life he was given. In 1956, Elvis was on top of the world. He was on TV, on the radio, and in the hearts of millions. He was the king of rock and roll, the idol of the teenage world. But even as he reached for the sky, he never forgot where he came from. He remembered the small town of Tupelo, the hard times, and the love of his family. He remembered Jessie, the brother who never got to share in his success. Elvis' success was a double-edged sword. It brought him fame, fortune, and the love of millions, but it also brought criticism, pressure, and loneliness. He was always looking for that connection, that deep bond that he knew he could never fully replace. But he kept going, kept performing, kept reaching out to his fans, because in their love, he found a piece of what he was missing. Elvis' faith gave him comfort. He believed that one day, he would see Jessie again. He believed that there was a place where all the loves of his life would come together, where he would finally be whole. Until then, he lived his life with a foot in both worlds, the world of fame and the world of his heart. As the years went by, Elvis' life became more and more complex. He faced challenges, triumphs, and heartbreaks. But through it all, he never lost sight of who he was and where he came from. Jessie was always with him, a constant reminder of the love and the loss that shaped his life. In the end, Elvis' legacy is not just his music, his fame, or his influence on pop culture. It's the love he shared, the connections he made, and the way he touched the lives of so many. Jessie may have been a ghost, but his presence was real, and it helped Elvis become the man he was. Elvis' story is a reminder that even in the midst of the greatest success, we carry our past with us. We carry the loves, the losses, and the memories that make us who we are. And in our hearts, we hold onto the hope that one day, we will find the love and the connection we seek.